Okay, I have with me today Viv Blondek, and I'm not going to give too much background on her because she's going to explain her background in a second, but she may be familiar to many of you. She's part of the 19 Nurses organisation, and I posted a video of her speaking at the University of Manchester some months ago. So we're going to talk today about 19 nurses, about nursing in general, and about Lucy Letby's case, of course. So firstly, just hello to Viv and thank you for joining me.
Well, good afternoon, Chris. Yeah, a little bit about me. I started my training in Chester in 1977, and worked at the count, well, not the Countess, but the Chester hospitals and then the Countess when it was built, ever since, full time. I spent the last 22 years in coronary care unit, which I absolutely loved, doing a lot of critical care work in there in the earlier days. And then I also became a branch secretary for a trade union, Unison. Um, and from that, I became very, very active within the hospital and the, shall we say, meeting with the executives, senior managers on a regular basis, and negotiating, consulting over terms and conditions and staffing issues. Um, had a lot of experience in that, and had a lot of work experience in policies, writing policies, policies and procedures, disciplinaries, sickness absentees, and you name them, I was involved in them from the trade union side. So I know a lot of the inside workings, if you like, of an NHS trust. And I really loved that side of it as well as the nursing side. But I retired in 2000, the end of 2013. And then I was in there one day because my partner had been admitted. He was in for 3 months. So I was on a daily visiting, and happened to walk in July. And there were TV cameras everywhere. And spoke to one of the staff, the security, what's going on? Can't tell you. So off I went to visit, and then I asked again, anyone going to tell me what's going on? And they said, no, we're not allowed to, which is quite right, because if anything is said, then things get put out of context. By the end of the day, that's a completely different story. So yeah, it's right at that point that you're not allowed to discuss the issues. Um, and then I went home that night, turned the television on, and saw why the television cameras were all over the Countess. I looked at this and it wasn't sitting comfortably. It really didn't sit comfortably at all. There's something's not right here. So I put my trade union head back on, and I went then to um, look at the recent reports that have been done on the Countess, um, on the maternity services. Um, and I found the one from Embrus that was stating there'd been 12 um, neonatal deaths in 2015. There was eight, I think it was eight. Um, and in 2017, sorry, 2016, there was only two stillbirths, but another seven deaths, and another two late deaths, which took it to 17 deaths in all. Um, so something's wrong here because we've got a big spike here in stillbirths, and that's not good. That indicates there's a problem with maternity services. If that there's a spike in that, if there's a spike within the stillbirths act is highlighting problems, then there can be problems with neonates. There'll be more babies needing neonatal care if there's a problem within the maternity services. But as time went on, I followed the case. Um, and then we get to the time where Lucy is um, going to court. And I decided that I will follow it right through. I still believed that there was something not right here, that it's had every hallmark of it being a scapegoating. So I followed it day by day. And I know, granted, it's not the same as being in the courtroom, but we got a lot of information coming through on the media, um, factual stuff from the courtroom. And this was looking even worse. I was seeing areas of malpractice or suboptimal care, shall we say. And why was that not being addressed? Why was that not being picked up? And as time went on, we got to the insulin issue. And then at that point, I will say, I thought, hang on, maybe I have got it wrong. Maybe there is a problem here because it does look like they could be in the TPM bags. Then again, if you're a trade unionist, you really remember that not everything you see or hear in front of you is correct. You have to look outside. So I looked to see any other reasons why these babies would be hypoglycemic and have high incidences of insulin. And then that started to open up other areas and a lot more questions. So no, she's not even, you can't pin it down on these insulin issues. Nobody saw her do anything. And there's nothing there, nothing that puts her, I would even say, as a suspect when you look at the evidence they had. And when the actual verdicts came through, I just couldn't believe them. I mean, what I'd read and heard from the case as it went through the courts, it's just astounded me that they could come to that conviction. So yeah, I've carried on since then, supporting Lucy's innocence, and very much under the radar for a long, long time. And what was become really clear is that the nurses have become very frightened. Looking at what's happened to Lucy, particularly in ICUs, any of the critical care areas, A&E departments, the nurses are frightened now that if somebody dies on them, are they going to be the next Lucy Letby? And that is really, really scary because that will have an impact on their quality of care as well. And so this really is quite serious now that these nurses are running scared. We've seen a drop in recruitment of nurses going into training, and we've seen nurses, good quality nurses, leaving. And that isn't what is needed. We need more nurses, not less. So now we have to look at what is going on with maternity services and what happened in these cases. And the Countess isn't on its own. There's Baroness Amos is at the moment investigating 12 trusts, maternity trusts, and finding the same problems there as the Countess had. Nothing new there. But when you actually go and look at when I actually looked at these cases and looked at the reports from Embrace, from Royal College of Peds and the CQC, it had all the hallmarks of gross underfunding and what happens when you get gross underfunding. So this was now 5 years into the austerity, the government's austerity programme. So what happens when you've got the finances there is you start to look at ways of cutting back, and training is always one that suffers because the money isn't there any longer for ongoing training for staff. Ongoing training is vital for patient care. Equipment New equipment doesn't come because they can't afford it. They're having to work on old equipment. The old equipment is failing, but no money to replace it. Um, so you're ending up with a workforce that then starts to get stressed and burn out. And then you've got staff going off sick. Then you've got shortages of staff. Then you're constantly dependent on agency nursing. Um, and the problem with neonatal is that there are so very few qualified neonatal nurses. It's those on the agency, mostly general nurses. There's a shortage all round of neonatal trained nurses. And that was one of the problems that the Countess had with their vacancies, was they fill in the vacancies in the neonatal unit. They couldn't get the qualified staff to apply. So we're looking at a lot of the issues there, which basically all contribute to the perfect storm. And this is what we ended up with, the perfect storm, where things went wrong and somebody's got to be made accountable for it. And there's no one person that is responsible for what happened in that unit. I say it's multifaceted. There were so many things going on that they all contributed to this poor standard of care that cost these babies their lives. Also, one question I have to keep asking is, why do they hold on to some of these babies that should have been out in level 3 care? They seem to hold on to them far too long, and why they were not getting them out so quickly.
Yeah. So that's an absolutely fascinating way to begin the interview. There's so many follow-up questions that I could ask you. Um, it's interesting for me to hear about someone who was there at the time, and you went home and heard about it on the news and so forth. I mean, that must have been quite emotional, was it?
It was because I'd worked there for so long. I didn't have any members over in the women's and children's, but I knew about the issues they had there. Well, a lot of the issues they had there. Never met Lucy, but she's a colleague. She was one of the staff. And, you know, having spent all those years um, defending staff or fighting for staff, for better working conditions, better pay, um, when you get better working conditions for the staff, that always has a massive impact on the patients. Um, and I can honestly say that everyone that worked there wanted the best for those patients and would get very, very frustrated if they couldn't deliver the high standard that they wanted to give and have been trained to give. And to see, what happened with the Countess, with the morale at rock bottom, it was so sad. And having the Countess criticised so badly as it was, I felt unfair in the fact that they were one of so many hospitals. On the Embrace report that year, the Countess was one of 22, 23 trusts who had been identified as having raised stillbirths and neonatal deaths. They weren't even in the top 10. So, they weren't, in comparison, they weren't that bad. But every death is bad. And we need to know why and what we can do to prevent things happening. So yes, we do need to look at it, but it just feels that the Countess has become the punch bag for the NHS maternity services, and I think that's quite sad. I
Hmm.
think we've got to remember that the staff that work there do their best, and they've been badly criticised, and I really think that's unfair.
Yeah. Um, so we're going to talk a bit more about the maternity crisis, but while we're on the topic, one of the questions that is often asked of myself, and I'm not really qualified to answer it, but I give my opinion, is about Lucy's union representation, about whether the union should have done more for her at the time. So do you have an opinion on this?
I have an opinion on this, but I have to be very careful what I say.
Okay.
My understanding is that Lucy was well represented up to the grievance, and she's represented by an RCN full-time officer at the grievance. But then when the police became involved, Lucy didn't have any backup or support, is my understanding. And that upsets me a lot, because if if a member, any union member, is going to be questioned under caution, they cannot do that without a solicitor present. And all the unions use the solicitors Thompsons, and they'll send a duty solicitor if need be. They will send a solicitor to support that member. And I know that they take on the cases. I can say that from experience, where I had experience of one of our members appearing in court, fully supported by Unison and by Thompson's. So the question I have to ask is, why was Lucy not represented by her union when she was first called in by the police? And it's a question I have to ask, and I would like an answer, as
Should,
many would, because,
should she have been? Should she have been represented?
well, according to their own website, it mirrors that of all the other trade unions, is that, yeah, it was a workplace issue. And so, yeah, they have a legal team behind them to represent and support the members. So, I just asked the question, what happened? I'd like to know the answer. There might be a very, very good, valid reason for it, but it does raise a concern. But I know for a fact that any of members of my branch, if there was any suggestion of interview under caution, they were referred immediately for solicitors and for the legal team.
Yeah, that seems fair. So let's talk about the crisis in maternity. So I'm sure most people that are watching the channel have seen these reports of uh, major problems, I think across the NHS as a whole, but maternity is deemed a particular focus. So the first question I just want to ask you is, was this something that was evident to you during your time in nursing?
In what respect?
Well,
Because midwifery is totally different to work I did, which
I
was
understand that.
general nursing.
I understand that. You know, were you aware of a crisis, or were you aware of problems, or if you weren't aware of problems in maternity, could you speak more about issues in the NHS more broadly?
I can talk more about the issues broadly. Well,
Yeah.
I can talk about to a point about the maternity services. I mean, I use them myself. I lost my first baby at 20 weeks, and they were really brilliant. That started off, me starting a campaign off to get baby cemeteries open, but that's another story. And then I went on to have two more children, two boys, and both with weren't straightforward, but the standard of care I got was exceptional. They were brilliant. I can't knock at all. And then I was hearing a lot of, before I retired, I was hearing complaints about the standards dropping within the maternity services. But this wasn't just unique to the Countess. We were hearing it from all over the country. Um, and so, yeah, there were issues, but you would say that we'd started with the underfunding, and that was having an impact right across the NHS. But with all the investigations ongoing at the moment with Baroness Amos and other investigations, like the Nottingham investigation that's due out in June, the report. You can see that the standard of maternity care has dropped throughout the whole of the UK. And I'm talking Scotland, Wales. I hear very little about Northern Ireland, but I'm sure they have the same issues. So yeah, there's got to be a reason why they've dropped and what we need to do to improve those services. For me, this is a personal opinion. When they stopped taking nurses for training as midwives, so you had a qualified nurse with about 18 months post-registration experience, could go and do a course in midwifery, which was an 18-month course, and they became midwives. But then they took that away and said, we'll have direct entry into midwifery. So you don't do, they are not qualified nurses, they are qualified midwives without the nursing qualification, the registered nurse qualification. And I didn't like the idea at that time. I felt that it wasn't going to help the profession. And I still to this day think that that is one of the issues that needs to be looked at, because patients today or mothers today going in through maternity care, there's an awful lot of mothers today who would never have been pregnant years ago. They've got long-term health conditions, and I think that they need to have done nursing as a start, certainly before doing their midwifery. I know they pop in and do a little bit, but it's a little bit that is not enough. Like I popped in and did a little bit of midwifery in my training, but not enough. It gives me an overview, but not enough to learn from. So I think that is one aspect that needs to be looked at. Another aspect, I think, is that there seems to be, and I'm hearing this from everywhere, not just Chester, there seems to be a reluctance of midwives to escalate when things aren't going quite right. And that's, I think, an area that needs looking at as well. But I think when we get the full report from Baroness Amos, that should be quite interesting, because I think what's come out so far is mirroring very much what's happening right across the NHS. Yeah, there's a lot more needs to be done, certainly in, as you might term, customer service, if you like, the way patients are spoken to and greeted, and they're not listened to is one of the things that's coming out, and that's vital that they start listening to patients.
Do you have any, you mentioned that there can be a reluctance to escalate things. Do you have any thoughts on why that might be?
It could be because they don't have a clear understanding of their limitations, and that becomes dangerous. And there are staff, I mean, not just in midwifery, but there are staff that do not, recognise their limitations. And that, I think, is, something that has to be addressed right across the NHS. And the reluctance to ask for help sometimes.
Yeah.
It's human nature that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Be looked at. That we should always ask. Anything we're unsure of, we ask. And I certainly would ask. I asked a lot of questions, an awful lot of questions. And I wasn't too frightened to say, oops, sorry, but that's about my comfort zone. there's no harm in saying that because none of us know everything. And that is the fact that things move so quickly. If I went back to coronary care now, I would be out of my depth because in the time I've gone, it will have evolved again. I wouldn't know what the latest drugs were. I wouldn't know, the latest procedures, policies. Um, they'll be doing things that were totally new to me. So yeah, you very, very quickly de-skill. It's surprising how quickly you can de-skill. And that's why if you've been off for a certain length of time, then you have to do a return to work update, if you like, just to make sure you're up to speed with everything that's happened since you were off.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, something I learned was that even since the events that associate with Lucy occurred, um, the kind of expectancy, life expectancy, survival expectancy, outcome expectancy for neonates has changed quite
yeah,
significantly.
yeah.
Um, so these fields do move very quickly.
I think within neonatal unit though, they've come on so well over the years. Um, I mean, they've got the centres of excellence and the work that they're actually doing in those centres of excellence, just amazing. Um, my children were born the early 90s. Um, the first one was scheduled to go to Skiboo because he was premature, but he was doing extremely well. So luckily I had him with me in an incubator. But they had a Skiboo, which is what it was, a special care baby unit. And it's evolved a lot since then. Um, so yeah, I remember Skiboo being very much a much lower level of standards of care as we have today, or not say it's not criticizing the standard, in the how it's evolved to become so highly experienced. Um, the the nursing input into that is very, very highly specialized. And it's just changing every day.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how quick things do change.
Mm.
Technology is just amazing these days.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so we're going to rewind a little bit now and talk about 19 Nurses. So this is an organisation, kind of grassroots activist organisation, you might describe it as, that probably most people are aware of because I posted numerous talks that took place at the University of Manchester was it in October last year, I think?
November.
November.
Mm.
It was cold, I remember that.
It was
Um,
weekend. It was a really bad. It was horrendous because the trains were cancelled because of the storms,
yeah,
and yet we
yeah,
still managed to get all the speakers managed to get there. Some coming
yeah,
in from abroad, and yeah, we were quite well represented,
yeah.
really.
It was well attended.
And
Um,
well attended as well, considering the storms.
yeah, absolutely. So let's talk firstly about 19 Nurses and what prompted this group to be set up in the first place.
Well, this 19 Nurses has three founder members, of which I'm one of the three. And we're all nurses, all three of us. But throughout Lucy's case and throughout the time afterwards, where we've been looking at the evidence, asking the questions, we've become very, very aware that there are nurses that are far too frightened to speak out. They're frightened they'll lose their registration if they support Lucy as being innocent when the convictions are that she's guilty. Um, they do believe they're gagged in a lot of places, and they've become scared now that the next time they go into work and something goes wrong, they're going to be scapegoated. So that's going to have a massive impact on this on patient care, but they don't feel safe, and that's the thing that bothered us. That staff are going into work feeling unsafe, feeling that they can't speak out anymore, they can't raise any concerns, And what we need is for staff to be able to speak freely if they've got a concern. And that's not happening now. So because of the fact that they couldn't speak out, we decided to set up 19 nurses to support and campaign for the nurses in the NHS and to get rid of this toxic culture that is in there. And that's how we started. Um, our membership now has grown and grown and grows every day. And it's not just nurses joining us. There are lots of medics on there, doctors, consultants, scientists, statisticians, um, radiographers, physiotherapists, loads of healthcare professionals there. And we realised that what we set out for to help nurses with has ended up being all healthcare professionals. Every single one appears now to be at risk. And that is not a good environment for anyone to work in, but at least they've got somewhere safe where they can talk to us and express any concerns, or we're there to help them if those who want it. So we needed to get that message out to public. And so first off, we set up a big meeting, public meeting, inviting the 19 nurses members and some others in Hereford, which was very well attended, which you were there, Chris. That went really well. So we went to Manchester and teamed up with the Manchester Innocent Project Group, who then provided us with a venue. And then, so they co-hosted with us, and that was a huge success. And now we're planning another one in June. And with that, we bring in speakers, but we don't have any money. We work on a zero budget. So I have to say that every single person that turns up to either to speak or as a visitor, they do it out of their own pocket. So hotel fees, they pay out their own pocket. The travel, they pay out their own pocket. And that just shows the commitment of every single person that is fighting to get Lucy's case heard and to get the NHS reformed and get it back on track.
Yeah. I mean, I spoke at Hereford, and if
Mm,
I just from my perspective, like based on what you've just said, I mean, I suppose the more I mean, I felt very passionate about this from day one, but the more I've become involved in it, the more I've seen that it's not just about Lucy, and it's not just about a miscarriage of justice. It's about a systemic problem that cannot be brushed under the carpet.
no,
Um,
no.
and that's why I think people feel so passionate about it. I mean, I care about Lucy's circumstances and the fact that a great injustice, in my view, has
Mm.
occurred to her. But
Oh, absolutely.
I also think that, I mean, we were talking earlier in the interview, and I didn't mention anything because you were talking, but I personally know two neonatal nurses who've left neonatal nursing because they don't feel safe.
Mm,
Someone posted a comment the other day, but I've had loads, but I just remember this one because it was a couple of days ago. I've left intensive care because I don't think it's safe, or
mm,
and we can't. It's going to get if this isn't addressed, it's going to get worse and worse because someone else will end up being charged.
mm.
It'll become more ingrained. So, I mean, I think that's why a big part of why I'm involved anyway, because I recognise what a big issue this is. Um,
I mean,
but
the NHS is never going to be perfect,
no,
never. But one of the things that is getting highlighted now, particularly on the maternity side, is the amount of money that is being paid out in litigation costs, compensation for harm. Is more than they're actually spending on the service itself. Now that is massive.
Mm.
Absolutely massive, and that has to stop.
Mm.
And the only way we can stop that is to have what I've said all along, we have to have a no blame culture. One where you make a mistake, you can put your hand up and say, I've just done something wrong, I've just made a mistake. And not find yourself sitting in a disciplinary, but sitting there explaining what happened, what the mitigating circumstances were around that that caused that mistake to happen, and what you can do to put it right, that it doesn't happen again. Um, when I first started nursing, if you made a mistake, you ended up in the office and you got an absolute rollicking. And I tell you, you didn't do it again. You did not make a mistake again. But now it's got to the stage where registration is everything, that if you make a mistake, you're on a disciplinary and a full investigation goes on, and then you get sanctions and you could even end up losing your job. So therefore, you get this, I've got to get myself out of this one. So you look at point a finger at somebody else. And that is not a way a workforce should be. The workforce should be supporting each other, working in teams, working together. And if you make a mistake, you it's human error, it happens. But there's a reason why that mistake was made, and that's what we need to be finding out. What caused that mistake? Not looking to sanction somebody or somebody to blame. We need to have it out. Now, what I've said for the last 18 months or more is that we need to have the air crash style investigations within the NHS. It's the only way it's going to work. If you do that, then what happen is a medical incident occurs. In the case of the Countess here, in Lucy's case, um, what would have happened, the executives were asking, what's going wrong? They got the RC, so Real College Peds in to have a look to see if they could identify anything. They were looking at it. What they should have done was have the medical experts at hand. There should have been a team like the crash investigators where they would then come in, all the case notes, everything put to one side, nobody allowed to touch them. They are now locked away. And they go in and investigate, not to find somebody to blame, but to find where the faults lie and find out what was happening. And from that, once they found out what's caused that increase, then they would be looking at recommendations to put that right. The Royal College of Peace put in 24 recommendations. Well, the medical experts would have put in different ones because they would have looked at it from wholly in depth, and they would have raised their concerns. The recommendations then could go nationwide rather than just trust-wide, nationwide, like the air crash investigators go. Worldwide, all the airlines come under the same regulations, then so would the NHS. So then you have improved patient care. And by improved patient care, because you're learning from your mistakes and not blaming somebody for it, you learn from your mistakes, put systems in place, patient care becomes safe, litigation cases go down. And that's the way it should be done. And I don't think bringing in the police, even with a team of experts, medical experts, would still have the same effect as a medical team of experts, true experts, not Dowie Evans. I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about
Top
people.
drawer experts.
Hmm?
Top drawer experts.
Top drawer experts, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I really want to echo that because one of the kind of narratives of Thirlwall has been things should be referred to the police more quickly, which I think is preposterous
Yeah,
and dangerous.
absolutely. I went to the Thirlwell submissions in Liverpool just the first day and was horrified when from the NMC they stood up and said one of their recommendations now is to call in early the
Mm.
police. And I'm sitting going, no, no, we don't need them in early. We need to find the fault. We need to find where the system has failed. It's a systemic failure and we need to find it. There's a lot of systemic failures with what happened in the Countess, is my belief. And they all amounted to ending up with these babies losing their lives, and some of them could have been prevented. We need to know what needs to be changed so that that doesn't happen again. It just will continue and continue until we get it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, having witnessed the police investigation of this case, that really the police shouldn't investigate at all until it's been
Well,
established that there was definitely malfeasance. If you
yeah,
had some strong medical evidence, and a lot of doctors were saying, yes, this is, then they should interview the suspect, perhaps. I don't think they should investigate from a
no.
medical perspective.
Well,
Admittedly, Cheshire Police could have followed the advice they were given by the National Crime Agency, and then they would have done a better investigation. But I would argue the police are not the right body to investigate these cases.
they're not. They're not. It's the thing is though that with the investigators, the investigation teams, they will have the actual ability then to bypass the police and go straight to the CPS, as has happened with the post office scandal. It's not police inquiry, it goes straight to. I mean, I know that was a complete mess, but
Hmm.
and I don't like to bring in the post office inquiry because it was um, a massive fail there. But that's how they come to bypass the police. Um, but there's other cases that the police aren't trained to look at, and I think air crash investigation style needs to be looked at in a few other areas as well. You can't expect people to effectively investigate something that they know very little about. And on the face of it, I mean, one example was when they were congratulating themselves for finding the um, diary with the codes in LD and long day nights. That to any nurse anywhere in the country, open that book, will tell you, oh, she's on long day, she's on night, she's on day off. That's what the codings were, and they thought they'd found a code. I had no idea, and that's a simple, tiny thing, but it's the way that things get perceived if you don't have the knowledge behind it.
Yeah, it's even in the court case. That there's even a discussion between Lucy and someone else about long days and an LD. But yeah, I mean that is just a joke. It should obviously never be in the case.
Do you know
Um,
it's actually written like that on the off duty? It's actually written LD, um, nights, day off. It actually has it. Each square on the day and your name has that on it.
hmm,
So it's used. Um, it's standard right across the NHS on
yeah,
rostering.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so I think one of the questions that I was going to ask you is about whether there's a safe working environment for nurses. So I think we've established that we don't think there is.
No, no.
Um,
And while it's not safe for nurses, it's not safe for the patients either.
yeah,
Because if they don't feel safe speaking up, then obviously the patients are at risk. Um, and to be honest, they work so hard. They
mm,
really do work hard.
mm,
Yeah, it's difficult. And you can have a really bad time emotionally, but you're trained to put emotion to one side. So you've just been into an emergency situation and you've may have lost that patient and you're devastated. And then you have to just turn around and basically go like that and go to the next person and just carry on as if nothing has happened, because
Mm.
that is separate to the next person, next patient. And it's very difficult, but you learn as you go, learn as you're in your training. But I think this is one of the things where people early on were saying to, why are these nurses, doctors, not understanding this is, they've got no emotion.
Mm.
Uh, Look at the case. I think it was the reason that Lucy's was so vilified was because these were tiny, tiny babies.
Mm.
Um, and that brings in a massive emotion from people. But with the medical and the nursing, you learn to put your emotion to one side, because if you don't, you can't do your job. It's when you get outside that that emotion hits. And when
Mm.
you sit in the car and cry because you've had a rough day, you've lost one of your patients, you sit in the car and you cry. But at the time that you're in there, you just get on with it. You have to, for the next patient's sake. And this is, I think, is a misunderstanding in the public, because they think that we don't have emotion. We certainly do, I can assure you. It's
Yeah.
just we learn to hide it while we're working.
It's like a compartmentalization, isn't it? You
Mm.
have to park it essentially, don't you?
Okay. And
Yeah.
this is why looking into these cases, we can look into them without getting emotionally disturbed about it. Angry, yes, you get very angry, but you've got to look at it without the emotion to be able to find out what exactly did go on and what exactly happened.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So with 19 nurses, you have visited Downing Street to deliver a letter.
oh,
So could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
yeah, wanted to, this was the very beginning of 19 Nurses. We wanted to deliver a letter to Keir Starmer asking for uh, a statutory inquiry into this case. So yes, we went down there, had to obviously arrange it with Downing Street, and we had BBC um, with us as well from the BBC Four, I think it was. As we went and delivered that letter. But unfortunately, we didn't get a response from Keir Starmer. Sometime later, we did get a response from the Justice Department. And it would have been nice if we'd have had confirmation that Keir Starmer was aware of what we were asking. But that was at the very, very beginning of 19 Nurses. And say we just moved on from there, and it got bigger and bigger. And I think we're all a bit overwhelmed as to how um, supported we've been by people.
Yeah, me too, with what I've done. It's incredible, but I think that just reflects firstly, how strongly people feel about it, and also I think how obvious it is that Lucy is not guilty.
Mm.
Once you start to look at it, it's obvious, really. So I think more and more people will come on board. I have no doubt.
I think we've
What
gone
did you, sorry, go on.
we've gone from the situation where it was an unfair trial and she needs a retrial, is to, once you've got all that evidence from the expert witnesses in front of you, you say, you can't say, we are saying that we believe she is innocent because the evidence is there in black and white, and it's factual evidence, not circumstantial or made up by somebody who just wants to win a case, which is what he said. Um, Gary Evans has actually said he's only ever lost one case. And it's, hang on, you're not there to win a case, you're there as a neutral witness. And that is another concern about, these court cases um, that are putting our nurses into prisons. Because Lucy's not the only one, there's another three there at the moment still fighting to get their cases heard.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And they've been sitting there a long, long, long time. One of them, I think, is 20 years now. still trying to get to the CCRC.
Yeah, yeah. What did the Department of Justice say when they responded to you?
Um, Not really a lot, basically, just acknowledging it,
Right.
And to be honest with you, I haven't got the letter in front of me at the moment to be
Yeah.
able to respond to that. Um, but I can get that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
have you got that letter?
have I
Yeah,
got it? No,
yeah.
no, no, no. I've never seen it. No.
We can send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll read it out and send it because it's so long ago and so much water's gone under the bridge. But
Yeah.
it wasn't helpful, shall we say? It was just
Here,
um
here's a generic response.
generic response. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's fine. That's to be expected. I mean, someone, I get a lot of emails from people that have written to their MPs, and I'd say well, I know for a fact in every single case apart from one, the MP just, dead bats it and pushes it away. But someone has actually agreed to do something recently. So I can't say any more about
Got
that. But
got one on
um,
board then. Yeah. I can say that what happens is it goes to the caseworkers, and the caseworkers do the answering, and most of it is generic templated letters coming out. Um, I could not confirm whether they actually do see them, or whether the caseworkers only send to the MPs the ones that they feel are important. I don't know how it works, but I do know the caseworkers go through them all the emails and they do respond. Because I've had from my MP, I've had a templated response
yeah,
when I've written to him. But
absolutely.
luckily, I do manage to catch him um, and speak to him personally.
Hmm. Yeah,
But writing to the MP, yeah, it's a good one. The more that do, the better, because it
yeah,
doesn't.
I agree.
So even if you're getting a templated letter, still keep writing.
The thing, yeah, people have to understand as well is their private feelings may be different from what they say to you publicly. So the more awareness you can raise and the more you can put it under their noses, the more one day they might
Yeah.
say publicly what they actually believe privately. So it's just an important thing to emphasize.
Mm.
So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the specific aspects of Lucy's case. But firstly, you told me that there are policies and procedures in place within NHS trusts to deal with allegations of patient harm, which were never actioned by consultants.
Mm.
So could you explain that, please?
Well, the first one that I can relate to is the policy they have for raising concerns on patient harm. And that's been around for quite some time. All policies are done, revamped every 3 years, or in between if there's a change in legislation or recommendations. So if you have a concern that you think that a patient has been harmed, and it doesn't matter who you are, you can be the domestic mopping the floor,
Hmm.
and you don't think that you think that a patient was harmed by a member of staff, you have to report that. And you've got the policy there for patient harm. Now, when there is a case or a complaint made that by a member of staff that there's possible patient harm, it is flagged immediately. Goes to a full investigation, and if necessary, that person will be removed, suspended, pending an inquiry. If it's found in the inquiry that there is a case to answer, then they will be disciplined. And that is the procedure. Now, in a case like Lucy's, where the consultant said that she was in June, that the three babies died and that she was there for all three, plus the collapse of a fourth one. They're trying to say that from that time on that, they knew that had suspicions of something. They say they raised suspicions. They never used any of the policies. They did nothing about asking for forensic testing on post-mortems. They raised, which they could have done. They basically didn't do anything until much later on, when more babies died. And if they had gone to the execs and said, we feel that she is harming babies because of, or this is what we've seen, her feet wouldn't have touched the floor as they took her out that unit and suspended her. But that didn't happen. That was another major red flag on the day that she was arrested, to me. Why has she not been suspended on full pay when they consultants said that they had concerns about her? When they asked what the concerns were, all the consultant would say, oh, it's a gut feeling. And that's all he ever said until after the grievance. And she was about to go back onto the unit. Up until that time, it was always, oh, it's a gut feeling. So, yes, it was investigated by the executives. They did look into it, but questions were asked. Nobody had a wrong word to say against her. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody had any concerns about her practice. And so she continued to work there. But the reason being that none of the complaints that the consultants said they made and not listened to were actually complaints. They were just, oh, it's a gut feeling. And they were out of order in the comments that they did make about her, which was dealt with within the grievance. And so policies are there to be used, policies and procedures, and they didn't follow any. They had loads of opportunities if they really believed those babies were being harmed by her to raise, and they didn't do any of them. So why did it suddenly all come to a head when she was coming back to the unit after the grievance? And the grievance was done around the time just before the Royal College of Paediatrics report came out. And that gave 24 recommendations in the unit, and a lot of them were aimed towards the leadership, i.e. the consultants. So they weren't very happy at the time, as you can imagine, because they've got a grievance against them, and now they've got these recommendations. And then Lucy was told she could go back to the unit, and they went to the police. Police had already been in. They'd spoken with the executives on 2 occasions. They laid everything down in front of them, and they said it's no case to answer. So there's a lot of questions around what happened there and what went on from there.
Yes, I agree. I mean, quite a few guests have spoken about this, but I want to ask you as well. How rare would it be for a nurse to engage in a grievance against consultants?
Never known one. So basically, unprecedented.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got no chance of winning one.
So it says a lot, doesn't it? That
it says a lot. It says a tremendous lot. The grievance is confidential, and that's why it was never sort of mentioned before. And that's part of the policies and procedures within the trust, that these are left strictly confidential. So they're only between the people that are involved in it. So there's very little said about her grievance, but there was the opportunity for it to be brought forward by prosecution in the court, but no, that was dismissed, I believe. But that speaks volumes as to what was going on at that time. When a nurse can have a grievance upheld against 7 consultants is massive.
Mm.
absolutely massive. Um, to be interesting, to have been a fly on the wall there.
Mm.
But,
Absolutely. So I know you have have some thoughts on addressing the scapegoating and persecution of whistleblowers, which we've established on the channel is a massive problem. So can you share your thoughts on how to address this?
well, to address the whistleblowing, basically goes back to the no blame culture,
Mm.
which is what we need, is no blame. So if you raise a concern about somebody, or then it needs to be looked into in the same way. It comes in with a no blame. You raise a concern that something's not right, then it's another investigation looking into what happened, why it happened, and how can we make it better. Um, and certainly that person that's raised that concern should never ever be victimized. And that is actually written in the whistleblowing policies, but it still goes on that, they are victimized. And it's unacceptable for people to raise concerns and then be victimized after. And so that has to stop. But with a no blame culture, you're changing the culture within the NHS, whereas when you can raise an issue, you're not looking to point of fingers at people, but to look at how the system is failing. And that then would mean that um, that was being looked into fairly, and there won't be any finger pointing by people trying to save their registration, and biting the hand that feeds them.
Mm.
So, it all lies hand in hand with the culture, changing culture, so that we look at faults differently, and certainly, encourage people to um, raise concerns.
Mm.
I think there's got to be a lot more incident reporting, clinical incident reporting, and that seems to be lacking in so many areas because
Yes, so
common.
how do you feel about all this datic stuff? So there's
I'm very pro clinical investigations and clinical incidents. Um, what happens is you raise an issue. It's a clinical incident. Could be is something as like dangerous staffing levels. If you're working that day and your staffing levels are dangerous, or you've got extra worker there and not enough staff to cover that extra, then you contact the manager. And usually it's out of hours because the manager on that ward or department will probably be dealing with it in the daytime, but it usually occurs out of hours. You contact the hospital coordinator and ask for extra staff and tell them why. To be honest, you're most likely refused because they're short-staffed everywhere. It's a common um, complaint of short staffing. So if you don't get staff, then you put in a clinical incident and say that we're working on dangerous levels here. We don't feel safe. We don't feel safe for the patient's sake. Do we need extra? Now you keep putting that in, and then the government see that coming in, then they know there's an area where there is problems and to be literally dealt with. If it's something serious, then immediately it's looked into. There will be an investigation ongoing. Um, so clinical governance, they are able to act immediately on major issues and on minor issues. They keep logs of. Um, Equipment's another thing that the comes under clinical instance if you've got faulty equipment. I remember doing an emergency transfer out um, where one of the pumps went. Battery was flat and they're plugged in all the time. So I had to make a decision which pump to let go till I got to the hospital they were transferring to. Look, it's only short transfer. Um, Came back, sent it to EBME for check-in and put a clinical incident in. Same thing happened again about 2 weeks later. I walked in about a week after that into the clinical area we have to find pumps, brand new pumps, sitting there on the side for transfer only, not to be removed from CCU. In other words, it was dealt with. These pumps weren't holding their charge. They were okay plugged in, but they weren't the batteries weren't capable of holding the charge because they were old. And so immediately that was dealt with. And I keep giving that example to staff, and they would say, "Oh yeah, but nobody ever does anything." Well, they won't if you don't put them in. There's this reluctance there to put clinical incidents in, as if it reflects badly on them or the management. And clinical incidents are a good way of making it known that there is an issue or there are problems in certain areas, and they will look at it. They are graded. I think the feedback is important to get that feedback from clinical incidents.
Yeah. Obviously, I came into this area blind three years ago, 2.5 years ago, and I'd obviously read things about the NHS and so forth, but I knew very little about the culture of the NHS and so on. So it's been quite surprising to me to find out how much wariness or even hostility there will be towards someone who raises issues saying, look, we could do this better, this is a problem, etc., etc. Why is that? Why is there that wariness and hostility?
I don't know. I think some people, oh, I don't know. I think it's just human nature with some people. Um, there is a reluctance to change. There
Mm,
always has been a reluctance to change, and they will go back to the old days quite easily rather than move forward. And I found this out quite a lot where been trying to make changes, bring in new changes of it specifically under the Gender for Change. Um, when we bring in new terms and conditions and stuff, they're just reluctant to change. Um, and the, you can't keep any service, any public service, back in time. You've got to move into the 21st century, and you've got to accept that things are different, and the jobs have evolved, and they keep evolving, and we have to accept that jobs evolve, but they still want to keep the old ways. They fixated in some cases on keeping on not having change because they like it. They're in the comfort zone. It's taking them out of the comfort zone to do things differently. Um, to have to change that culture within the NHS. But I mean, it's not unique to the NHS.
no,
It's not unique at all.
no, definitely not. Definitely not. Um, let's talk a bit about Jayaram and Child K. So I know that you're quite critical of this process and what Lucy's been convicted on for Child K. Do you want to walk us through that and explain why?
Well, yeah, I went to court case. Was there most days.
Did you go to the trial and the retrial?
It was the retrial. Didn't
Yeah,
do the trial, did the retrial.
yeah.
Um, and I sat there for most of it. Um, I didn't go for the last day, um, because by this time I was so distraught by
Mm.
what I was seeing in that courtroom, I couldn't stand to listen to the closing speeches because I was so angry with what I was, the way things were going. Um, for me personally, what I saw was nothing short of major bullying of Lucy. The way she was spoken about, the way she had fingers pointed at her, um, and the way the whole case was conducted was totally unreasonable, in my opinion. This was a retrial, and the prosecution were allowed to name all those babies and refer to her constantly throughout that trial as a murderer.
And can I just emphasize, because I have spoken to someone else who attended the whole retrial who made this exact point. It was
Mm.
she described it as relentless.
It was relentless. It was. It was the same as the main trial. It was relentless right through the main trial. But having sat in the courtroom and seen it, experienced it, I was horrified. And why is anyone allowed to do this to somebody? Innocent till proved guilty has always been the ethos here on British justice. This poor girl was guilty before proven innocent from the moment she was charged. And she hadn't got a chance because public media did the trial, the convictions,
Mm.
and even gave their punishment, which wasn't nice, before she'd even got into court first time, which is unfair and should never have happened. So things need to be changed to protect people, guilty or innocent. They until they're proven guilty, they should have that same protection.
Mm.
The court case itself, listening to the registrar, then it was the consultant from Arrow Park that took over the care of baby K. And then it was Jayaram. I was just shocked at the way that was, that they conducted. The consultant from Arrow Park came in early because he had other commitments, and that was the only time he could come. I thought he was defence witness because he went straight to Ben Myers to be questioned, and his answers I thought were in Lucy's defence. And everything that he said, he spoke really well. Yes and no answers, no waffle, and straight to the point. And everything he was asked, he was able to answer clearly, precisely. And from the answers he gave, I could verify when the next charts went up on put the tiles up, the next charts went up. I would go onto those charts because nursing eyes, you can read them. You know what you're looking for. I knew exactly what I wanted to know, where to find it. Chart come up, I'd look at it. Oh, right, that's quite right. He's right. And that clarified the point there was a major issue on her respiratory state. Then Jayaram came in the following day, and I was there for the entire day. And it was just waffle,
Mm.
waffle, waffle, waffle. And certain comments he made, you could hear the short, sharp intake of breath from all the nurses sitting where we were in the observation room, going, no. Comments he made, you got to think, did he know what he was doing?
Mm.
Why is he holding on to this baby so long? I've got a lot of questions I'd like to ask as to why that baby was held in there and not fast tracked out to Arrow Park. But yeah, I wasn't impressed. I was impressed with the consultant from Arrow Park, but certainly not from the two on duty that night. And I don't think that they could clearly answer any of the questions put before them.
Mm. Can we talk about the Caroline Oakley and Lucy identity issue as well?
Oh, yeah, they're very similar build. There is a, yeah, similarity. And with the lights down at night, yeah, I could easily mistake one for the other, I would imagine. I'm a bit miffed as to why they didn't bring Cadel Oakley into the court for baby K, because she was the shift leader that night.
Mm.
And she will have been in the same room with Joe Williams and baby K. So why she was never brought in as a witness, she should have been, in my opinion, because she was the shift leader and she could answer a lot more questions. What we found out was the change in the swipe data. Data have been put to the first court as swiping out of the unit. Well, you don't swipe out of the units. You don't swipe out of the wards. You swipe to get in and you let yourself out by pressing a button on the wall. And so when it came to the retrial, they agreed that the swipe data was wrong and people were appearing into the unit when previously they'd been out of the unit. And it put a completely different a different picture of where people were at the time. And so when you looked at the swipe data and the charts that were, that took within that time, and the notes that were made within that time scale, from 3:40 till 3:50, you've got a 10-minute timeline. And within that timeline, 3:40 was when Caroline Oakley returned to the unit. Caroline Oakley was working in room 1 with Joe. That is the point when Joe will have handed over and then gone to speak to the relatives. Lucy was busy in room 2, opposite the nurse's station where Jayaram was sat on the phone. Joe's witness statements never altered. She always said that the alarms were going when she came back in that unit. She would never have left that unit and left that room 1 empty with 3 nurses, with 3 babies in there, particularly the new one that just been admitted. So when when Caroline Oakley came back, that was her time to go and update the relatives. So 3:41, we know that the transport team phoned to speak to Jayaram, and Jayaram admitted he was on the phone to them at 3:41. And Lucy was dealing with her babies as per the notes and charts from her night shift for there. So if Lucy had gone, it would have been because the alarms were going. There was no need for her to be in there if Caroline Oakley was. So she will have gone to answer alarms and to see if you needed help. And according to a email from Dr. Jayaram much earlier on, he states that Lucy came and got him and said the baby was desaturating, which is completely different to what he said in the courtroom. And that raises many, many, many more concerns.
Mm.
But from the timeline that from sitting there and looking at all the evidence that was there and listening to all the evidence that was being given, I would say that Lucy wasn't anywhere near that baby that time. And if the tube became dislodged, it was because it wasn't stable. It was a tiny tube and it was not stable. And I think that was the issue. And that is why you had the 94% gas leak, because it was not in the right position.
Yeah.
That was when the baby arrived. Yeah. So there's a lot to look at in that case. And what makes me so angry and really angry is what these parents have been put through. Now, in baby K's case, they were back in court again for a second time.
Mm.
And nobody should be put through that.
Mm.
Nobody. If this had been handled in the right way from the very onset, then an investigation's done with the experienced people that needed to look into it, who weren't available or made available, then these parents wouldn't have been put through the traumas that they've been put through. And I think it's tragic, absolutely tragic. But what's even more tragic is that we believe that she's innocent. Shuli's team believe that there was no murders, but poor medical care, and yet they've been told differently. And I know that if it's one of my children or my baby, I would want to know, be certain that it was medical negligence rather than murder. There's nothing worse than knowing your child has been murdered. And
Absolutely.
I think that is something that has to be addressed, is to why were these parents put through so much and are still going through so much? Because this is going on and on until we get that truth out. And the sooner we get that truth out, and the sooner these parents can get the truth and be able to put, to recover from what's happened. I am livid that these parents have been put through this. Nobody ever should have been.
Yeah. And that seems like a great place to finish the interview. So I just want to say finally, obviously Viv has worked at the Countess of Chester Hospital for a significant period of time. We have skirted around that a little bit today because I wasn't sure what I could ask her. I wasn't sure what she could say, but we're definitely going to have her back in the future. So in the comments section, I'd just like you to leave any questions that you have for her about the hospital, about general nursing, about the kind of stuff we've discussed today, about Lucy's case in particular. And we'll work out what we can ask and what we can't. And also, it must be said that there may be certain questions where she would have to say, "Well, I don't know any more than you." But we'll work it out. But please do leave questions because we'll have Viv back again soon, and I know people will have loads. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and thanks for what you've done with 19 nurses. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much, Chris.